This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Authority Strike Herbicide from FMC. One application of Authority Strike Herbicide delivers a powerful one-pass burn-off to start, followed by extended weed control later. See your local retailer today for more information.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome to RealAg Radio here on this Friday, March 1st. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and it is Friday, so we've got the Issues Panel later in the show. But first, of course, we're going to hear from Anne Wasko with the beef market update. She's also got some StatsCan inventory numbers that are pretty interesting that we're going to dig into. And then, of course, as promised, the Issues Panel, I've got Shaun Haney, Andrew Campbell, and Kelvin Heppner joining me. We're going to talk about, of course, the passing of Brian Mulroney, but all sorts of other topics that have come up this week. So thank you so much for joining us here on the show. You can always send your feedback 1-855-776-6147 or find us across social media. Let us know if you've got feedback or a question, and we'll try and get you an answer as soon as we can. All right, let's take a quick break, and I'll be back with the beef market update right after this.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is all about Koch Agronomic Services. And joining me on the line is Tom Barry. What are nitrogen stabilizer considerations then under uncertain weather, particularly dry conditions or persistent drought conditions?
Well, that brings in twofold, right? The first two times when you really want to be considering them, like I said, are broadcast or shallow banded applications. The second consideration is drought. And the second consideration, even though we don't have a whole lot of snow right now, is if you are in an area that has moisture, is denitrification or leaching, even though leaching doesn't occur as much as people think it does in Western Canada. But that's when you want to use a product that has a nitrification inhibitor in it.
So remind us then, what products from Koch Agronomic Services should farmers be considering as they sit down to work through these scenarios?
So if it's wet or going to be a little bit moist, more moist in the spring, you're going to want to use a dual inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. And if it's on a drier bias, you're going to want to use a urea inhibitor.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday, March 1st. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and it is time for the beef market update with Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Welcome here, Anne.
Good to be here, Lyndsey. Thank you.
Yeah, this is, okay, so I'm just going to say for everybody, I am so glad February is over. I don't like it. And so in like a lion, in like a lamb, I don't care. It's March. So I'm thrilled. But is March, you're going to bring us through the cash prices. Is March a quiet time, this early March? Is this a quiet time in the cattle markets?
Oh, it really varies, in terms of what's going on market-wise. We know we're getting closer to spring, which is a super busy time, on the ranches in terms of spring and calving and all the rest of it. And typically, as we get further into spring, a little deeper into the second quarter, we'll be into barbecue season. So, yeah, there's some good things that happen over the next little while. So it's hard to put a this is how much always is, because I think it varies a lot depending on the weather.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's dig into some of what we did see for prices south of the border, and then we'll work our way north.
Yeah, well, south, not a lot of change in market. Sounds like a lot of the cash trade, both north and south, at that 183 live, and the north trade kind of at that 290 delivered on the dressed market. So kind of steady as she goes. That maybe would be considered a bit disappointing. I think most were expecting the market maybe to keep moving stronger. seasonally as it does into March and April. So we'll see how the next couple of weeks flow, but I think this one maybe would be called disappointing. The choice cutout, that wholesale price up $4 this week, $3.04, which is a good sign, but at the same time, it's mostly because the kills have been smaller, so we've shorted the product a little bit, and the cutouts responded. But nevertheless, it's back up over $3, which is a solid cutout market for this time of year. I did want to, while we're still on the U.S. market, just finish with an update from last Friday's cattle on feed report in the U.S., the February 1 report. Pretty much as expected, on feed numbers were 100% of last year. January placements were the negative. They were down 7%. They were expected to be lower than that, so the market kind of did its reaction early this week. But the January marketing number was right on expectations at 100% as well. So the market's kind of already dealt with it, but I did want to kind of update folks on where we ended up. Bringing it to Western Canada, kind of quiet from what CanFax is saying in terms of cash market prices. There was some asking prices out in the mid 380s delivered dressed, but there hasn't been much confirmed business. And it sounded like there's a little more packer interest out of the U.S. this week as well. So we'll see what they report later today in terms of how that cash market ended up in the West. So that's kind of not a really exciting week, but steady as she goes.
We'll take steady. Beats the alternative. Okay, but we did get to talk about some numbers, though. Statistics Canada came out with an inventory report, cattle inventory report for January 1, and there is some really cool data in this. So, Anne, walk us through, where are we at with cattle inventories?
Well, I think the safest thing to start off, if you're going to have a one-line summary, is as expected. So it's also not exciting, but this is some key pieces that we use to determine, okay, what's going on at the ground level in terms of the numbers, what's changed. For those of us analysts of the world, we find it very interesting. But the total cattle and calves, so everything, down 2% to start off this year, 11.055 million. So that's Canada's total cattle and calf inventory. That is the smallest since 1989. And same with Canadian beef cow numbers. They were also down 2%. So that's one of our key numbers that we watch. 3.46 million is our count in terms of national beef cow herd, and that is also the smallest since 1989. So are those surprises? No. That's kind of exactly where most were expecting it to come off with. Just because we're talking about dairy cattle more or crossbreds more and more these days, the national dairy cow herd in Canada was unchanged from last year. It sits at 964,000 head, so just under a million head of dairy cows in Canada. And the national beef replacement heifer number, so this is the one that we really want to watch, it was down 6%. Are we surprised? No. We saw all those big placements. We've talked about it so much, Lyndsey, in terms of seeing heifers going on feed, seeing heifers move through the auction market, seeing heifers in the slaughter mix. All those things last year with the drought told us we knew where the heifers were going. And this report now confirms, okay, they're not in the cow herd, and the national number's down 6%. The bullish number, if you're sitting listening to this in terms of you're at the cow calf level or the stocker level, the feeder supply outside of feedlots on January 1st. So this is after everything's counted in terms of what's already on feed. What's left outside of feedlots to place on feed this year, that number continues to drop down as it has each year for the last number of years. And this year it's down 4% from last year. So there's a big support for the feeder market as we go forward. I mean, it already has been, but now as we look back and look forward, that's going to be a strong supporting factor on the supply side in terms of what's out there to buy.
Okay. Now, that's it. The heifer number is a big number, definitely one that we're paying attention to. We also saw some numbers though on the farm cash receipts, which I think this does start to put this picture together a little bit more as well. So we're talking inventory numbers, but we're also looking at the dollars and the dollars and cents. Where has the cattle and calf sort of income side shaken out for Canada in this last year?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's another very critical piece as we go forward. And this also is not surprising because we did have record cattle prices in 2023, so it makes sense that the 2023 farm cash receipts would be up substantially. For cattle and calves, StatsCan reported them up 26% from 22 at just about $15 billion. And if you do all livestock, up almost 10%, 9.8% to $37.3 billion. And just on the comparative side, crop receipts in 2023 were only up 2%. So over the last number of years, if you recall, it's of course been crop receipts have well outpaced the gains that's been going on the cattle side. So certainly a change in that. And if I might, Lyndsey, I just wanted to go back to the cow numbers because everybody always asks, well, what do you think's going to happen? Is the cow herd going to continue to get smaller? I think, just looking at where the cow herd is important to remember. So this report told us 45% of the national cow herd is in Alberta, 28% is in Saskatchewan, 11% is in Manitoba, and 6% in Ontario. So that kind of really brings home, if the key, the most critical parts of the drought have been going on in Alberta and Saskatchewan, then that's the critical piece I think that we really need to see change as we go forward. So just thought I wanted to throw that little piece in there as well.
It's definitely a good perspective. All right, Anne Wasko, we will come back again to the Beef Market Update in 2 weeks like we do every Friday. Thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Okay, it's been great. Thanks, Lyndsey.
All right, we'll be back with more RealAg Radio and the Issues Panel right after this. I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern. It is time for a product spotlight. With me now, I've got Tyler Gullen. He's the Technical Services Manager, Western Prairies for New Farm. You can't go far without having a discussion on resistant weeds, herbicide-resistant weeds in Western Canada, specifically kochia. So how has New Farm been working on solutions to help farmers navigate the kochia and greater herbicide resistance challenge?
So New Farm's been working really hard on combating herbicide resistance for a long time, and something we did recently was rediscovered a lost herbicide in the process that we coined Duplosan. So Duplosan is a Group 4 herbicide active, a systemic good Group 4 herbicide active. The most exciting part for Western Canada is kochia is one of these 8 herbicide-resistant weeds that Duplosan is still controlling. If you want more information on Duplosan or Oxbow and how they can help manage resistant weeds in your field, you can always go to newfarm.ca/Duplosan, that's Duplosan.
All right, welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday, March 1st. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. And before I bring in the issues panel, we're going to pay a couple bills. And this segment is brought to you by Co-op. Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. Co-op, here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at co-op.crs/farm. Shaun Haney's better at that one than me, but that's okay. And speaking of, let's bring in the issues panel. We've got Shaun Haney joining us from the Commodity Classic at Houston, Texas. How are you, Shaun?
Yeehaw, Lyndsey. I am here, and I had a great time in Texas this week with a quick stop in Ottawa. I think I was there for a total of about 10 hours, and we were at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture meeting that you and I, we saw each other on. That was on Wednesday morning. It feels like 2 weeks ago. But yeah, at Commodity Classic this week, and record attendance here at the Classic. It's really grown. Big releases from John Deere and a few other companies, and it's been a great week.
All right, we'll dig into a little bit more in a minute. Also joining us, we've got Andrew Campbell from the Cow Palace down in Southern Ontario. How are you, Andrew?
I am doing wonderful. It's we're going into a weekend of sunny and 20 degrees. I might plant corn. No, but that would be awesome.
Could you?
You know what? The conditions are, I actually finished fall tillage 2 days ago.
I dare you to, you should plant some corn.
You know what? It crossed my mind. The conditions were fantastic. It then went to minus 10 degrees Celsius at night. I'm not sure the corn would be thrilled, but gosh, March 1st planted corn. What could go wrong? You know?
What?
With today's genetics, you'll be fine.
They'll be fine. Okay, we are being very facetious, everyone. Please don't take this as agronomic advice. Okay, also on the line, we've got Kelvin Heppner joining us from somewhere on a highway in Manitoba, doing a very Manitoba thing, heading to a hockey tournament. Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well. We filled up the family vehicle with some co-op fuel yesterday, and we're trucking across the countryside to Deloraine for some girls' hockey provincials this weekend.
All right. It is the very, very Canadian thing to be doing. Okay. We are going to start on somewhat of a somber note, of course, but speaking of very Canadian, yesterday we did receive news that Brian Mulroney had passed at the age of 84. For many of us, I think, and Kelvin, maybe you're a little too young for this, but Brian Mulroney was really the first prime minister I remember. As far as thinking back as young, which one was the first one that I could really remember? And he definitely was it. And of course, larger than life in so many ways. It has been really amazing to watch the coverage of his incredible career, and his legacy, really. And not all of it rosy, but definitely impactful. Shaun, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on Brian Mulroney, what he meant to Canada.
Yeah. So it kind of caught everybody off guard. At least I had missed if something else was going on with his health. I agree with you. It is the first prime minister as well that I remember, and he's sort of a larger than life figure. And I remember he spoke. I heard him speak in person. I believe we were at a Grow Canada meeting, maybe in Ottawa, and he suffered from vertigo, and so he couldn't be on the stage, and so he spoke from the floor. And his ability still at an older age, at that time he would have been in his late 70s, his ability to still carry the room and speed up and slow down and raise his voice when he wanted to and lower it. He had everybody just hanging with every single word as he talked about, the NAFTA agreement and, seeing such importance from Canada's perspective of free trade and how that was going to lead Canada to a more prosperous future. And it was very controversial at the time. He just was a larger in life. He was like Superman. Like, I agree with you. He kind of had the whole package. There was some controversy, of course, on his exit, not to be unmentioned. But just a great Canadian prime minister in my mind, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, is he the first prime minister you sort of really remember?
He's actually not. I'm a little offended. You only think Kelvin is too young for that. But
it's the facial hair. It's the facial hair. It's the facial hair.
It's the patchy beard you have going on.
Yeah, I know. You think it should be younger. That's the thing. So right. No, it actually. So he is a little before. Mine was really kind of Jean Chrétien, but I've actually really enjoyed following Brian Mulroney since, because it's the same thing, Shaun. I remember the first time I heard him speak, it was Farm Tech in Edmonton, actually, and it was the same thing. He was down kind of on the main floor, and just like his communication skills are just so great in this. Kind of very powerful words in this casual way, which really kind of brings an audience in. And I remember, I think he talked for an hour, and like no one looked at their phones, no one did anything, because just of his ability to share a story but have a message after that. And since then, that was kind of early in me kind of crisscrossing the country, and since then I've really enjoyed kind of following and hearing from him on a whole bunch of different perspectives. And I was listening to a few podcasts this morning that were kind of remembering him, and had a lot of people from a lot of different political parties have some really great things to say about him. And I think it's just one of those things of, in the political environment we have today, where everybody is at each other all of the time. It's just kind of a reminder of, I think, what is possible in politics. I really don't. I really hate the idea that that's, bygone and we'll never get back to that. I think it kind of is that reminder of, there is a way that you can be, kind of political opponents, as John Manley had said in an interview yesterday. They weren't political enemies; they were political opponents, and he very much thought those are two different things. And very much had respect for the idea that, you can have different ideas, but all want a better Canada from it. So I think that's really what I get from, a guy like Brian Mulroney.
Mm-hmm. And Kelvin, I'll go to you in a moment, because you actually sat down with Brian Mulroney at that Farm Tech in 2017, and I want to get your thoughts on that. But I would say, Andrew, I echo that one of the things that this look back on Mulroney's tenure as Prime Minister, as well as his time since, and how involved he has still been, maybe more behind the scenes, but certainly politically across really the world, his importance of friendship, and exactly that you could be opponents, not enemies. And let's face it, he brought forward a lot of unpopular ideas. He brought in the GST. Like, when I will, not to tell tales out of school, but the first person I texted everybody was my dad, because in our house, if you were going to talk politics, it was with my dad. We talked finances and politics. It's about the only thing we talked about. And I texted him, I said, so what's your favorite Mulroney memory? That's all he said. And all I got back was, that guy was a crook. So of course, that's perspective. My dad's in his mid 70s. So, was through the thick of the PC governments with him. And anyway, so that is, he was a very controversial figure at the time, but ultimately, and this, these aren't my words, but ultimately he brought forward policy that ended up being really where the world was going, right? So NAFTA and free trade, I mean, that was a monumental deal that was not the norm at that time. And so, Kelvin, that's where I want to go to you. You did get to sit down with him in 2017 at Farm Tech. He gave us a lot of time. It was really quite amazing. I got to briefly meet him at that time. I'll tell my story about talking on the phone in a minute. But met him there. He gave us a lot of time. And you could tell in that conversation, and you can go back and listen to it here on Real Agriculture, about how he believed in NAFTA and was very proud of what he accomplished in this deal.
Yeah, I think all three of you have summarized up key parts of what Brian Mulroney was and what the value that he provided Canada as like that great personality. The word statesman has been used a lot to describe him, both the last number of years, but also now in his passing. And part of that is that giant personality that Shaun talked about. He had that booming voice and just that sheer huge amount of charisma. He could use that. Like, we had the room just listening to every word that he said. And when we sat down with him at Farm Tech, that was right in the middle of NAFTA renegotiation with President Trump. And of course, Brian Mulroney and Andrew, you alluded to this, he had friends on all sides. He would talk about Houston on a first-name basis. He would talk about Rona on a basis. He was at the time the interim leader of the Conservative Party here in Canada. Talk about Donald on a first-name basis, because he would go down to Mar-a-Lago and his friends and places, and certainly he wasn't. It's been a long time since he was Prime Minister, but he used that influence behind the scenes and connected people. And in many ways, he was a big ideas person. Free trade and NAFTA has been mentioned here. He played a role in ending apartheid in South Africa. He was there on the scene with basically the end of the Cold War. Just a lot of big ideas and not always popular, like the GST. And again, I think it came back to his personality and that charisma. We don't see many politicians like that anymore that just can convince people that this is the way to go, and even if it's a risky idea, that it's a risky big idea, convince people let's go down this path, let's be decisive, and let's try the big change. Meats Lake was another, I guess, area where it wasn't maybe as successful, but a lot of big ideas that Brian Mulroney pushed, and I think shaped Canada in many ways, the Canada that we have today.
Remember the fear of acid rain?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, that's another one. That acid rain accord, in many ways, conservatives in Canada can brag that they were pushing multinational environmental agreements before other parties because of that. He was big on that too.
Just think about the kind of leader on both sides of the border at that time. Of course, he was very good friends with Reagan, Bush 41, Herbert Walker Bush, and those were different times. Like those were the leaders at that time felt bigger than life. Like it's very fascinating to kind of compare to where politics is sort of, like you were talking, Lyndsey, it's sort of spiraled.
Circling the drain. So, but I think, and to Andrew's point too, this is one of the things I want to say is, I think in the past 24 hours, I don't know if I've ever felt more like this could be perhaps a galvanizing moment for Canada to say, you can, first of all, be a conservative and care about the environment. Hello, amazing. Yes, it can happen. You can be opponents and not be enemies. You can make decisions that fiscally are uncomfortable but are the right one to make. And I'm not saying, because again, I was a kid when all this was happening, but when we look back, and honestly, yes, Jean Chrétien came in and, had incredible popularity after and did, balanced Canada's books and all that. But he even, and he spoke last night, putting the GST in place allowed the Liberals to do that. Like it was good for Canada. And that's the part that I think we've really gotten away from, is we're very divisive. We're very, there's the Western alienation. We're not thinking about Canada. We're thinking about individuals. We're thinking populist. We're thinking, trying to get votes. We're not thinking about Canada, what it means to be Canadian, not just here in Canada, but on a global scale. And I think Mulroney was a prime minister that was very proud of what Canada could do on a global scale, being the smallish country that we are as far as population, but on a grand scale could do really big things.
He also left the Conservative Party, though, in shambles,
in
right?
Absolute shambles.
The two things that one of the new Corvette and Kim Campbell have in common, 2 seats.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
They were.
It was a Miata.
Decimated.
Nothing as fancy as a Corvette. It was a Miata.
Decimated.
Decimated.
Not just the Progressive Conservative Party, also the country. Remember where Quebec was at the end of his time in power as well, in terms of referendum and everything that Canada went through in that 1993 mid-90s period.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was absolutely. Okay, we have to, we'll end it there. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday, March 1st. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Blackhawk EVO from New Farm. Blackhawk EVO is the next evolution in pre-seed burn-down herbicides. Powered by Duplisan, Blackhawk EVO delivers fast, flexible, and complete control of early germinating and winter annual broadleaf weeds. That's right, it is time to be thinking about weed control. All right, so let's bring in most of the issues panel. I've got Shaun Haney joining us from Commodity Classic in Houston, Texas. I've got Andrew Campbell joining us from down in Southern Ontario. But Kelvin Heppner has exited the issues panel, and for good reason. He's out. We were having some connectivity issues, and we want to make sure that this is lovely on the ears and that you can hear what Kelvin has to say. So there you go.
High standards around this place.
There are standards. So anyway, that's where we'll leave that. Now, I do want to, Kelvin reminded me when he left, that I did mention the phone call I had with Brian Mulroney. So just quickly, this is my before Farm Tech, and before that, years and years and years ago, I was doing some house sitting for Charlie Mayer, Now, Charlie Mayer he served as ag minister under Mulroney for a time. And so I was house sitting for him. Charlie at that time, not home a lot, so I would look after the pets and whatever. Anyway, he had his seat from the House of Commons, so the green and the wooden, and he had it sitting by one of those, pretend antique phones, and the phone rang, and so I answered it back in the days when I answered the phone. And the most recognizable voice on the other end says, "Hello, is Charlie Mayer there?" And I said, "Well, no." And of course, immediately I know who this man is. I mean, you can't be Canadian and not. And he said, "Well, it's Brian Mulroney here." And I almost said, "I know." Because of course I knew that it was Brian Mulroney.
So that's M-U.
Yeah, exactly. And sorry, Ryan. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so just Brian. Anyway, so I fangirled for a minute, was like, okay, still taking messages from Brian Mulroney. Anyway, so there you go. Okay, let's move on here. We've got a lot to cover. So we've got a few things to talk about. Shaun, you mentioned that we were in Ottawa this week for the Canadian Federation of Agriculture's AGM. Spoke with Steve Verhoeven. And so, let's keep it in sort of the NAFTA USMCA world. Verhoeven was on stage with you to do the show, so we heard him here on Wednesday's show. But you also caught up with him after, and that audio is on RealAgriculture.com because it's a really neat conversation about the current trade winds right now and some of the things that we're dealing with. He had some interesting points about, perhaps what's happening with Europe and the UK and why we're not sending beef that I found really interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
So in regards to, I asked him about the UK and them walking away from this free trade agreement this bilateral agreement that we're trying to negotiate between the two countries. And I got the sense and the feeling that he feels that Canada's ask is quite high here. There's a bit of a high bar. And Canada's got to make a decision on whether or not it's going to accommodate some of the requests that are being made by the UK when it comes to carcass washes. And it sort of was a bit of a different discussion in the sense that he wasn't like, the UK's being unreasonable. I got more of the sense of like it's up to Canada here to decide how badly we want to ship some beef into the UK related to this carcass wash issue. So I encourage everybody, even though I was on about 2.5-3 hours of sleep when I did the interview, it's a little scattered, but encourage you to check out the audio for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's on our YouTube channel as well. You can go check that out, that added discussion. And there was, of course, some discussion on that as well as this potential renegotiation of USMCA in mid-2026. It doesn't have to be a renegotiation, but it could be. And go ahead, Shaun.
Well, what he said was, and he corrected me, he said, like, this is not a renegotiation off the hop. Basically, July 1st, 2026, all three countries will have to provide, I think he said, like, written notice. I'm not sure who we're writing the letters to, but we have to provide written notice on whether or not we want to continue with the current agreement or we want to have a relook, as we could put it. Now, I think the smart money in the room is assuming that post-U.S. election, there is going to be, from either side of the aisle, I might add, this isn't just a Trump thing. I think the Democrats are in the same sort of boat. There's going to be want to be a relook. So look at that July 1st date as really the key. What happens past that, that's where things really do get interesting. And he talked about how there'd be a work plan. This sounds like potentially another long, drawn-out process. I will also say that I asked him about Bill C-282 and whether or not that was a really good idea from Canada's point of view to protect supply management. And he said you never want to go into a negotiation as a trade negotiator with sort of your hands tied behind your back on certain issues. So I didn't get the sense from him that he really thought that this was like a super, super grand idea.
Mm-hmm. So now, Andrew, you're a dairy farmer in Southern Ontario. You participate in supply management. Seeing a bill like C-282, is that something that you're like, yes, we need this, or is it a thanks for that?
Yeah, it's one of those situations of I think when push comes to shove, like it's a great show of support for the sector. That's great. Do I have every confidence that is going to protect it and we're never going to give anything away ever again. I maybe don't. I think that's probably a little too optimistic of a thought process. I think it very much depends on, when it is and which government is and all those types of things. But to Shaun's point on the, kind of renegotiation side, I had heard the Trade Minister, Mary Ng, talking on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and she had kind of done the same thing of kind of realigning and recorrecting just exactly how this goes. Because I think there was some nervousness of, clearly there's a direction of where the U.S. election is going. There's a direction of where a Canadian election is going. Like, there's going to be a lot of different players. And you mentioned that on the panel, Shaun, with Steve, too. Like, there's going to be a lot of change before we probably get to 2026. And I think we're all naive to think that everybody's not going to come to the table and say, hey, I'd like to change this. I think the real dynamic is going to be, and the impression I got from Mary Ng was like, it's just going to be a long, drawn out process. It's not that the negotiation or the agreement ends that day if you don't come to an agreement. It's just one of those things that you put in, you'd like, hey, I'd like this changed, guys. And they come back and say, no. And then you do that over and over again for a long time until you come to an agreement. That's the impression I got.
Well, the impression that I'm getting on the ground when I talk to farm groups, even in the circles of farm groups that would be a little bit more supportive of supply management, I am not getting the impression that anybody is holding any sort of foundation for Canada, that we're not exactly building a fort around supply management with 282. And Steve, as Steve described, this is nothing, basically as a political gesture or a political point of, hey, I support this. In reality, it's sort of like the Three Little Pigs, building that little straw house. It's not a house of bricks. It's a house of straw, and it'll quickly be blown over. Look for the Trump, if it is a new Trump administration, look for this 10% tariff on all imported goods to be the big ask to attempt to get Canada to cave on certain issues, market access for dairy products being one of them, along with some of the auto stuff. So it's and the dispute resolution, which the U.S. is trying to fix, as Steve mentioned that as well in the interview.
So did you know the dispute resolution was actually the sticking point on getting the original NAFTA through? It was actually Mulroney that insisted on it, and that was where the U.S. didn't want to agree to the original dispute resolution. So it's interesting that we sort of come full circle on this. Go ahead, John.
Because I think everybody wants, all sides want it, where the dispute resolution is a process that potentially favors their side. Right. And so from Canada's standpoint, we want dispute resolution because we're definitely the smaller of the trading partners. Right. From the U.S.'s perspective, there's a very much of a stigma perception that this is loaded against us because we keep on losing all these dispute resolutions. This is not fair to us. So there's two sides to how both sides are seeing this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And it speaks to the fact of, the rules-based that Steve Verhoeven talks about, in that, we as Canada need that kind of rules-based system to have that, to level the playing field a bit in how you do that. And it just doesn't exist without at least somewhat of a strong dispute resolution process. It just is that fact of, everybody wants to change the dispute resolution process, I think, if you're not getting it your way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was, part of the point is that we want dispute resolution to work and be fair, but realistically, from the U.S.'s perspective, it is sort of a clause in there that's probably going to be brought against them more than anybody else. So, of course, they're not going to be necessarily super keen on it. But as you mentioned, Shaun, of course, dairy is not going to be the only thing. We've got the auto sector, of course, there's going to be a lot of back and forth on. And I've been seeing more softwood lumber stuff, and I sort of, to me, that feels like very like 1990s, like that's all that I think I ever heard about that. And, the ozone depletion and acid rain was softwood lumber, but that's still an issue. So definitely, if it is a Trump administration, that 10% tariff is going to be the big one. And to the point on CUSMA, USMCA, the original agreement, if nothing were to change, it expires 10 years. So even if we continue to have these conversations and say, yes, we want to work on it, the agreement stays in place and just continues as it is until there are agreed upon changes. So it's not like it dissolves necessarily unless, of course, there's something that really explosive that happens.
Well, Rahul said some of the original asks that the U.S., that Lighthizer had in that renegotiation of the NAFTA agreement, some of those original asks, Canada would have been better without the agreement.
Yes. Yeah.
That was it. That was a very interesting thing that he pointed out.
Yeah. Because that was could you imagine? Anyway, I don't want to imagine that because that would be incredibly major, but that's how big some of those original asks were. So we'll see what it looks like. But of course, we've got a little bit of time before. So November we'll know what we have for an American government. And of course, next October we'll know what we have for a Canadian government. Just quickly, we have just a moment here. Shaun, I just want to touch on, I know Kelvin had shared this earlier this week on Trudeau's popularity. Because I just want to touch on this quickly while we're talking about elections. I think Trudeau is now in third place
in Quebec.
Yeah. Are you surprised by that?
I don't know a lot. I wouldn't pretend to be an expert in Quebec politics, but this is the trend we've seen really across the country. Is this government continues to slide? You think the corn market's on a slide downwards? Let me show you the polls when it comes to the Liberals.
Have you met Quebec? Yeah.
And again, this week, of course, was the anniversary of the Walk in the Snow, and everybody wants to talk about the Walk in the Snow, and 40 years later, blah, blah, blah. There is a big, there's a question the Prime Minister's got to ask himself is this about me, or is this about the Liberal Party and what the future is going to look like? And many leaders do not know when to walk away and call it quits. And we're seeing the same thing in the U.S. with President Joe Biden, who definitely is like aging in dog years by the month. And I think it's a real question on what the Prime Minister wants to do. But he told, I interviewed Ryan Jesperson earlier this week about his interview with the Prime Minister last week, and the Prime Minister said he's running again. So here we go. I guess he's going to get he's going to run into the same thing that Stephen Harper did. We vote you out. We don't necessarily vote leaders in.
Yep. Now, Andrew, to Shaun's point, as the leader, do you think about what's best for you, what's best for the Liberals, or best for Canada? I mean, if Trudeau really believes that a Liberal government is what should be in place, which you would think as the leader of the Liberals he does, is that not the signal that it's time to move on?
Well, that's, I always am curious of what does a meeting like that of all his advisors look like? Like, are people saying, no, you're doing an awesome job, great job, yes. That it must be, because how else do you go around? Now, I do think there's an element of you are always going to say you're running until the day you don't. Like I don't think you ever are wishy-washy on that decision. But at the same time, like, why would you not decide shortly, give some time, like going back to the Mulroney and Kim Campbell? Like, it's not like, we waited a great amount of time and gave Kim Campbell a great opening. He sunk that ship so hard before he passed it off that there was no chance, no matter who, that person was. It's one of those things of, like really, if you want to do something, if you want to give the next person an opportunity to kind of show off what leadership might look like and what you can actually get done, you have to give them enough time to be able to get some of that legislation through and get in front of cameras. And honestly, like, if that doesn't happen shortly, then he better run in the next election, because there's no hope for the next person anyway.
The lower they go in the polls, the least likely you want to be the next person. It's like owning the golf course. You want to be about I said this before. You want to be like the third, fourth, or fifth owner. You don't want to be the next.
You don't want to be the next owner. Okay, we need to take a break, but Invita bridges the nitrogen gap all season long. Enable your corn crop to fix the nitrogen it needs from the atmosphere when and where it needs it most. Let Invita set your crop up for success by requesting it from your local retailer. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday Issues Panel. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and you deal with many uncertainties on your farm. Managing risk should not be one of them. MNP's Ag Team specializes in risk management. Visit mnp.ca to learn how you can stay ahead of the game and plan for the unknown. All right, we'll bring in Shaun Haney, Andrew Campbell. Sorry, Kelvin. Let's talk this week. Let's keep it in the food sphere and, frankly, just fun things in general. Wendy's announced a creative way to charge for things, or that it's going to do this dynamic pricing, sort of like surge pricing for Uber or food delivery. Shaun, your thoughts? Good idea, bad idea?
Very interesting. The more I think about it, I wonder why it's taken so long. For this kind of model, everyone's calling it like that dynamic, sort of like comparing it to Uber. When it's busier, you pay more, which means that things can get really expensive during very, very busy times. And I remember as a university student, after we got out of the bar at 1, 2 in the morning, what'd you get? You went to Wendy's and got that Big Bacon Classic. So that would maybe be an expensive time to go get that burger. I think they're trialing it in the U.S. only. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah.
It's
interesting.
It is very, very, it's fascinating. And I wonder how the on-the-ground store locations will like it. Right? There's corporate, and then there's the people actually running the stores on what their feelings are about some of the pushback around it.
Yeah. So, Andrew, I mean, it is sort of, if you think about it, even like flights, as fewer seats are available, they become more expensive. Or during, spring break, they're going to go up. All of those sorts of things. Does this, would you change when you go to Wendy's for your Frosty and fries to dip in your Frosty just to save some cash?
Yeah. See, I think what they actually should do is they should actually do it backwards than that. You shouldn't necessarily increase the price in busy times. You should reduce it to get rid of inventory that's sitting too long, right? It's one of those things that you want to get rid of it, because I think, and it's just some of the discussion I've seen, and I have seen Wendy's take some heat on that because of, increasing food prices. Obviously, that's, the big topic right now, and everybody thinks they're raising prices. I'd be very interested to see in the restaurant business, how much gets thrown out of the back. Grocery stores would be the same thing. Can you create this where, actually, we're almost done breakfast and we cooked way too many, wedges, whatever they are. We've got this pot of coffee. It's going to go bad here. Let's give it to $1 for the next 20 minutes instead of $2. And do that. I think that would be a really interesting way to do it. I think Shaun's point on, the fact that for local restaurants, what that does, all that signage is coming out, from a central location and doing that. It's not like the local restaurant wants to go and start changing prices every half an hour. I think that will create, something, a bit more of a challenge, but I would love to see how can you reduce food waste in a lot of places in the food chain by just changing the price, kind of rapidly, on the fly.
And I guess we also could see whether or not price is one of those driving factors, or if it really is just about getting. These are the two sides. Do you extract more profit out of existing sales at a certain time, or do you potentially save some money and thus perhaps extract more profit by making sure that you're wasting less, right? And there's the labor component too, right?
Well, Lyndsey, 83% of the Wendy's stores are franchised. So 83%. Here's the other reality of this is that I would love to hear what those franchise owners believe.
Yeah.
Because if you think if you owned if you're running a Kentucky Fried Chicken or a KFC, or you're running Subway as a franchise owner, there's a lot of friction between corporate and you trying to make some money as the franchise owner. And this to me speaks of big pushback from those franchise owners.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe they've got a better idea. Exactly. Maybe to Andrew's point, they would love to do what Andrew wants to do, but it's corporate that says this. I just want to throw out there en français, it's PFK. Anyway, that's KFC in French. So there you go. Okay, let's, we only have a couple minutes left here, but being in Commodity Classic, big rollout from John Deere, and of course this is a show that you're going to see some new equipment, some huge equipment, all that sort of stuff. And so we do have a poll on Real Agriculture because we've been having this discussion this week. We saw Case IH came out with the Steiger not long ago of a 715 horsepower. Now we've got John Deere rolling out this 835 horsepower behemoth.
Plus is over 800.
Yes, Andrew, I'll start with you. How many horsepowers do you think on your farm is where you top out? Like through your career, you got a lot of career left. You're just, as we've established, a baby here. Is 600 enough? Is 7? Is 8? Are you so glad there's an 800 and change?
Yeah, and for us personally, like just being here in Southern Ontario and where we are, we don't, a nice square 100 doesn't exist for us. It's chopped up. There's drainage through it. There's bushes. There's, I think we have one field that's square and everything else is on angles and smaller than that. So it's one of those things that I don't see it necessarily fitting for us. We fit in that category of, probably a couple of smaller ones because they just fit better. That being said, I think there obviously is this opportunity. We see this that, not just from a standpoint of, okay, we want bigger equipment, but, then you need less drivers because now one piece of equipment can do it instead of two. Now we can kind of reduce a lot of these extra costs that I think there probably is. I mean, that's where the industry is moving in other parts of the continent. I think what we need to also think, though, is as more robotics come out and as we see, where that sector moves, I think we are going to see this divergent of we're going to have some that is really big doing a pile of acres and some that is really small autonomous that is handling stuff and maybe one person is handling 4 machines remotely. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how those play out. But I think equipment companies have proven that once you get a big piece of equipment, the next thing to do is make it bigger yet.
That's
yeah,
right.
and I'm thinking back to my conversation with Machinery Pete going back to late January, and I've been seeing some of the posts online about what some of these used 2-year-old X9s are worth. The market has significantly dropped. There's a lot of depreciation in those suckers, and I asked them about like who's buying a 2-year-old X9, like where's the market for that? He's like, forget about that. Who's the 3rd or 4th owner? Yeah. Of that size of equipment? And the same thing goes in the tractor market. I think there's clearly a market for people to be buying brand new 830 horsepower 4-wheel drives. We've established that. Is there a market for the 3rd and 4th owner of that tractor? That's yet to be sort of decided. Maybe it's in Eastern Europe.
Yep. And so that is the question, right? And to Andrew's point as well, and we've talked about this as well, if you want to add efficiency, that's one thing for sure, and going wider, going bigger. And then we have that question of autonomy, but it also ultimately comes down to people power. You have to have the people to put in these machines or run the autonomy. And so autonomy and bigger equipment solves that issue. But realistically, that's not an overnight flip the switch for a lot of farms. There's a lot of, like with you, Andrew, I mean, you don't have, quarter section fields that you're trying to cover.
Well, and I think it also creates this challenge of then what does it do for the market for us, which we tend to be we're in that kind of 2nd to 3rd owner. Of 200 to 300 horses, kind of the window we tend. What does that do for that market? Because all of a sudden, these other ones that used to have these, and there was lots of equipment kind of rolling down. Does it lessen that? It make it more competitive, so those tractors actually aren't depreciating as quickly. It's more expensive to buy. It'll be an interesting dynamic long term.
Well, and speaking of autonomy, Lyndsey, my feeling is becoming more and more solid here that if I was a crop farmer in any of these regions we're talking about, U.S. or Canada, I would be doubling down and super committing to finding autonomous solutions as they roll out and become economical, because the shortage of labor, as we heard from Kark, that problem's not solving itself. And so robotics and autonomy is clearly a lane that farmers are going to have to really consider, maybe earlier than they maybe thought they would have to.
All right, we're going to leave it there because we have to. We're out of time. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you, Andrew, for joining me here on RealAg Radio. This has been fantastic. Thank you, Shaun, for letting me host. I really do enjoy it. Okay, if you've got any feedback on today's show or anything we do here at Real Agriculture, drop us a line, 1-855-776-6147, or find us, of course, across social media. And I'll talk to you Tuesday. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Authority Strike Herbicide from FMC. Strike twice with 2 Group 14 modes of action and take care of the toughest broadleaf weeds, including kochia, cleavers, Russian thistle, and pigweed. See your local retailer today for more information.